First Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 25 He then gave an order, cut the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other. 26 The woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion for her son and said to the king, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." But the other said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two." 27 Then the king gave his ruling, "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." 28 When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe, because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. Most Bible versions describe the two women as harlots. The Hebrew word used is zonoth, which is derived from a word meaning to be fed. It could mean that these ladies were considered to be professionals. The pulpit commentary comments, the Jewish writers would understand hostess, innkeeper, in support of which it is alleged that prostitutes never have children, or if they have are not solicitous about them. The meaning hostess, however, as if from ZNWTH, to feed, is not to be entertained for a moment, but we may readily admit that these children, though born out of wedlock, were not necessarily the offspring of professed harlots, though the fact that their mothers dwelt together and alone, ver. 17, is certainly suspicious. The Hebrew word used in the story in Joshua 31, where the two spies stayed at the house of Rahab, is zana, which literally means to be highly fed. Adam Clarke's commentary suggests that the women were not prostitutes, but his opinion may have been influenced by the Victorian spirit of his time. We read, "If these had been harlots, it is not likely they would have dared to appear before Solomon, and if they had been common women, it is not likely they would have had children. Nor is it likely that such persons would have been permitted under the reign of David. Though there is no mention of their husbands, it is probable they might have been at this time in other parts, following their necessary occupations, and the settling the present business could not have been delayed till their return. The appeal to justice must be made immediately. The whole story would make little sense if these were married women, living together in the same house." Solomon showed amazing insight in the emotional side of the case. He understood what it meant for a woman to have a child. The exchange of the dead baby for the living one was proof of this. He also realized that there was some professional jealousy between the two ladies. One of the women stands out for her carelessness and emotional detachment. For a mother to roll on her child and not wake up in time to do something about it shows extreme carelessness. To exchange one baby for another also indicates that there had been little or no natural affection. The important thing for one of the women was to have a baby, no matter which. As the pulpit commentary observes, it is somewhat difficult to account for the pertinacious claim to the child, preferred even before the king by the pretended mother. The most probable explanation is that having taken the child in the first instance on the spur of the moment, in order to avoid the reproach of having killed her offspring by her. 31 Josh 2:1. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 25 He then gave an order, cut the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other. 26 The woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion for her son and said to the king, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." But the other said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two." 27 Then the king gave his ruling, "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him, she is his mother." 28 When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe, because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. Most Bible versions describe the two women as harlots. The Hebrew word used is zonoth, which is derived from a word meaning to be fed. It could mean that these ladies were considered to be professionals. The pulpit commentary comments, the Jewish writers would understand hostess, innkeeper, in support of which it is alleged that prostitutes never have children, or if they have are not solicitous about them. The meaning hostess, however, as if from ZNWTH, to feed, is not to be entertained for a moment, but we may readily admit that these children, though born out of wedlock, were not necessarily the offspring of professed harlots, though the fact that their mothers dwelt together and alone were. 17 is certainly suspicious. The Hebrew word used in the story in Joshua 31, where the two spies stayed at the house of Rahab, is zana, which literally means to be highly fed. Adam Clarke's commentary suggests that the women were not prostitutes, but his opinion may have been influenced by the Victorian spirit of his time. We read, "If these had been harlots, it is not likely they would have dared to appear before Solomon, and if they had been common women, it is not likely they would have had children. Nor is it likely that such persons would have been permitted under the reign of David. Though there is no mention of their husbands, it is probable they might have been at this time in other parts, following their necessary occupations, and the settling the present business could not have been delayed till their return. The appeal to justice must be made immediately." The whole story would make little sense if these were married women, living together in the same house. Solomon showed amazing insight in the emotional side of the case. He understood what it meant for a woman to have a child. The exchange of the dead baby for the living one was proof of this. He also realized that there was some professional jealousy between the two ladies. One of the women stands out for her carelessness and emotional detachment. For a mother to roll on her child and not wake up in time to do something about it shows extreme carelessness. To exchange one baby for another also indicates that there had been little or no natural affection. The important thing for one of the women was to have a baby, no matter which. As the pulpit commentary observes, it is somewhat difficult to account for the pertinacious claim to the child, preferred even before the king by the pretended mother. The most probable explanation is that having taken the child in the first instance on the spur of the moment, in order to avoid the reproach of having killed her offspring by her. 31 Josh 2:1. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Clumsiness and neglect. She found it difficult to draw back from her false position, which indeed she could not do without owning herself both child stealer and liar, and so she put on a bold face and maintained the imposture even before the monarch himself. That she did not really care for the child is evident from ver. 26. Solomon's verdict, giving each of the women half of the living child, is both profound and amusing. To cut the living child in two would result in two dead children. The fact that the one who was not the mother immediately consented proved a total lack of emotional attachment. That was evidently what the king had counted on. There is no mention of cutting the dead child in two, which would have meant a perfect balance. We read that the mother of the living child was filled with compassion for her son. The Hebrew words used are kamar, to be deeply affected with passion, rakum. The womb. Literally, her bowels burned. She would rather give her child away than to see him killed. It is interesting to observe that, when Solomon's decision became public knowledge, the people ascribed it to divine wisdom. Yet, Solomon had used the principle of the natural affection of a mother for her child as the basis of his verdict. Human natural love is a God-given matter. We love because we are created in God's image and God is love. 2. Solomon's wisdom in administration, 4-1-14. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, observes, Solomon's wisdom is now shown to encompass his administration of state affairs, including his choice of cabinet members, 4-1-6, and district governors, verses 7-19, and his reordering of business to control palace and temple supplies, taxes, and labor, verses 20-28. The historian then summarizes the exceptional quality and breadth of the royal wisdom, which embraces international culture and learning, verses 29-34. A. Solomon's high officials, 4:1-6. One so King Solomon ruled over all Israel. 2, and these were his chief officials: Azariah son of Zadok, the priest; 3 Elihoreph and Ahijah, sons of Shisha, secretaries; Jehoshaphat son of Ahilud, recorder; 4 Benaiah son of Jehoiada, commander-in-chief; Zadok and Abiathar, priests; 5 Azariah son of Nathan, in charge of the district officers; Zabud son of Nathan, a priest and personal advisor to the king; 6 Ahishar, in charge of the palace; Adoniram son of Abda, in charge of forced labor. This chapter opens with the statement, "So King Solomon ruled over all Israel." Initially, David had only ruled over the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, but he ultimately became king over the 12 tribes. Solomon was the only king whose rule included all for the whole duration of his reign. After his death, the kingdom was split in 2. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. The NIV reads, "And these were his chief officials." The Hebrew word used is sar, which generally refers to an official. The same word is used for Pharaoh's personnel who commended Sarah to Pharaoh when Abraham went to Egypt. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. 32. The Pulpit Commentary comments. We are here confronted by 2 questions of considerable difficulty. First, to whom does the title priest here belong, to Azariah or to Zadok? Second, what are we to understand by the term a spiritual or a more or less secular person? The commentary continues to state that Luther and other influential interpreters understand that Azariah, the son of the high priest Zadok, was, together with the sons of Shisha, one of the scribes, for 3. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings observes, every king made personal appointments to his court and army command. Solomon shows continuity with the policy of David by employing Benaiah son of Jehoiada and Adoniram son of Abda and Bai. Inclusion of his sons-in-law, Ben-Abinadab, v.11, Ahimaaz, v.15, nephews, Azariah and Zabud, and close supporters. The grandson of Zadok continued that priestly family influence, though the emphasis may be on his concern for a united kingdom, all Israel, as it was under David, 2 Samuel 8 verse 11. Solomon's inclusion of an official in charge of the new districts which broke across traditional tribal areas and of one person in charge of forced labor led to a reorganization which sowed the seed for the rupture between the northern kingdom and Judah which was to follow. Azariah was grandson of Zadok and son of Ahimaaz, 1 Chronicles 6 verse 9, 2 Samuel 15 verse 29, 36. Elihoreph may be an indication that those of foreign birth, Canaanites, were included. Cf. Hurrian personal name E.H. Lyric. NB, in charge of the calendar, is based on changing the text to over the autumn, year Al-Haharep. But the Hebrews, unlike the Assyrian eponyms Limu, never named the new year in this way with the names of officials. Moreover, the beginning of the new year in the autumn is probably unattested. Scribe, SPR, or secretary, NIV, was a professional title ranging from humble writer to Secretary of State. Here the existence of 2 officials may mean that one covered foreign and one home affairs, or as illustrated in Assyria, that they used different methods or languages when keeping records. NB Adjutant General emphasizes their principal administrative role based on keeping lists (SPR). Jehoshaphat, who had served under David, 2 Samuel 8 verse 16, 2024, continued as recorder, Mazkur. As such, he was more a chief of protocol than a remembrancer or a recorder of the past. His status was almost that of a Secretary of State. NEB. Zadok and Abiathar may be the persons of the same names as in 2 Samuel 8 verse 17, 2028, and not, as some argue, just taken from David's list here. Nathan is a common name, but could be that of the son of David, 2 Samuel 5 verses 14 to 15, rather than the prophet, 111. The office of Superintendent of the District Officers, verses 8. 19, or Regional Governor, NB, was introduced by Solomon to aid his reforms. The king's friend, or personal advisor to the king, was an office last held by Hushai, 2 Sam, 1537, 1616. Abiathar was in charge of the palace. Heb, he who is over the house, i.e. he, was controller of the royal, household, and estates, NEB. In time, this office increases in prestige to that of prime minister, 1 Kings 16 verse 9, 18 verse 3, 2 Kings 10 verse 5, 15 verse 5, 18:18-37, 32 Genesis 12 verse 15. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Some GKMSS add Eliah, son of Joab, over the army. Adoniram may be the same as David's appointee to the same office, 2 Sam 2024, who even survived to Rehoboam's time, 1 Kings 12 verse 18, but they're read Aduram. For the part played by forced labor, Heb. Mas as Alalak Masu, in focusing opposition to the regime, see 1 Kings 5 verses 13 to 18, 9 hours 15 minutes and 22 seconds. B. Solomon's administrative districts, 4:7-19. 7 Solomon also had 12 district governors over all Israel, who supplied provisions for the king and the royal household. Each one had to provide supplies for 1 month in the year. 8 these are their names: Ben-Hur in the hill country of Ephraim, 9 Ben-Deker in Makaz, Shalbim, Beth-Shemesh and Elon Bethanon, 10 Ben-Hezd in Araboth, Soko and all the land of Hepher were his, 11 Ben-Abinadab in Naphot Dor. He was married to Taphath, daughter of Solomon. 12 Bana, son of Ahilat, in Tanakh and Megiddo, and in all of Bethshan next to Zarathan below Jezreel, from Bethshan to Abel Mahola across to Jokmeam. 13 Ben-Jeber, in Ramoth Gilead. The settlements of Jair, son of Manasseh, in Gilead were his, as well as the district of Argob and Bashan and its 60 large walled cities with bronze gate bars. 14 Ahinadab, son of Iddo, in Mahanaim. 15 Ahamaz, in Naphtali. He had married Basemath, daughter of Solomon. 16 Bana, son of Hushai, in Asher and in Aloth. 17 Jehoshaphat, son of Peruah, in Issachar. 18 Shimi, son of Elah, in Benjamin. 19 Jeber, son of Uri, in Gilead, the country of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the country of Og, king of Bashan. He was the only governor over the district. The division into 12 districts, each with its own governor, was probably more related to the number of months in the calendar year than to the division of the nation into 12 tribes. Each governor was responsible for providing the royal court with supplies for 1 month of the year. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, observes, the new subdivision helped to centralize control of taxation and the levy for labor service. The system appears to have been a Solomonic development and not dependent on Egyptian influence. Solomon tried to preserve tribal regions as far as possible, to incorporate adjacent recently occupied Old Canaanite areas, and to make adjustments to bring foreign elements into the kingdom. The plan was not directed to exploit the roughly equal economic potential of each area, nor deliberately to undermine the independence of tribal families, especially of the House of Joseph. The new system developed from earlier practices and was basically to remain unchanged till the end of the divided kingdoms. The obvious purpose of this detailed list was probably more to demonstrate the wisdom of Solomon in making practical arrangements for the government of the nation than to impart information for the benefit of future readers. Although all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. 33. There is little in the section that will inspire us to be drawn us into closer fellowship to God. The main lesson for modern Christians may be that, if we surrender our intellect to God, He will be in the details of our daily activities. See provisions for the court for :20-28. 20. The people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. 21. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all his life. 22. Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal, 23. 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. 24. For he ruled over all the kingdoms west of the river, from Tifsa to Gaza, and had peace on all sides. 25. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, lived in safety, each man under his own vine and fig tree. 26. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. 27. The district officers, each in his month, supplied provisions for King Solomon and all who came to the king's table. They saw to it that nothing was lacking. 28. They also brought to the proper place their quotas of barley and straw for the chariot horses and the other horses. These verses provide us with a description of the conditions of Israel's golden age. They seem to be the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham after his sacrifice of Isaac. I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me. 34. The chapter describes how well-to-do the Israelites were, not how really blessed they were spiritually. The comment of the author of these verses on the condition of the average Israelite is, they ate, they drank, and they were happy. Nobody went hungry or had any physical needs. The reign of Solomon has often been seen as a foreshadowing of the millennial reign of Christ. The Scottish writer George MacDonald once asked the question, "Do you believe that God can punish a person by making him rich?" He answered the question by saying, "That affluence could be one form of God's punishment, but that is usually not the way we regard prosperity." Neither did the Israelites believe this at that time. Agag, son of Jacob, understood the dangers of affluence when he wrote, "Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only mine." 33. 2 Timothy 3 verses 16 and 17. 34. Genesis 22 verses 17 and 18. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, "Who is the Lord?" Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. 35. The way the author of these verses describes conditions under Solomon's reign, however, are not meant as a warning, but as a description of God's blessing upon Solomon and the wise way in which the king ruled the nation. The material conditions under Solomon's reign are described as an image of the heavenly spiritual reality that is awaiting us. The first matter mentioned is the territorial extension of Israel's domain. It coincides with what God promised to Abraham, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenite, Kenizzites, Cadmonites." 36. This promise was fulfilled during the reign of Solomon. Although not all the territories were physically occupied by the Israelites, they were subjected to the Israelite throne and paid tribute. Life at the court was one of extraordinary ease and wealth. Every day was lived as a celebration, as if life on earth was an image of heaven to come. The pulpit commentary comments on the king's table. The daily consumption of the royal household is now related to show the grandeur and luxury of the court. And it agreed well with the greatness of the kingdom. The lavish provision of oriental palaces was evidently a subject of wonder and of boasting to the ancients, as the inscriptions and monuments show. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, comments on the provisions for daily life at the court. The core, NB core, is a measure RSV of capacity. Like the Homer, it equaled 6 bushels, 220 liters, i.e. 185 bushels of fine flour, salet a luxury, and 375 bushels of meal, a husked barley, comma. Most oxen were stall-fed, JB free grazing. The deer, AV harts, NB stags, and other animals were table luxuries, as were choice fowl, variously identified as geese, guinea fowl, hens, or fattened cuckoos, JB. The statement in v.25, each man under his own vine and fig tree, is an Old Testament metaphor for a peaceful and happy life. We find the image repeated a few times in the Old Testament. Point 37. The Hebrew text of v.26, which is chapter 5:6 in some manuscripts, reads, "And Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, and 12,000 horsemen." The Book of Chronicles has the same number as 1 Kings. Point 38 in the Solomon sinned against the specific instructions given by Moses about the duties and privileges of the kings of Israel, which stated, "The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them, for the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again." 39 Solomon's horses required extra attention, which was also provided by the various district officers who had to come up with certain amounts of straw and barley. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, writes about the stables and horses. 4,000 stalls, Urat, REB stables, follows LXX. 2 Chronicles 9 verse 25, Heb, RSV. RB 40, in keeping with the needs of 1,400 chariots, 1026, using a pair of horses. 35 Proverbs 30 verses 8 and 9, 36 Genesis 15 verses 18 and 19, 37 Micah 4 verse 4, Zechariah 3 verse 10, 38, 2 Chronicles 9 verse 25, 39, Deuteronomy 17 verse 16. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Each plus reserves. However, the word has been more fittingly taken to be a team yoke. In 855, Ahab supplied 2,000 chariots from the northern kingdom, 12,000 horses, peril. The Heb word can stand for either horse or horse and rider. D. Solomon's wisdom, for :29-34. 29 God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. 30 Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the men of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. 31 He was wiser than any other man, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahal, and his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. 32 He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. 33 He described plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He also taught about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. 34 men of all nations came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. For some reason, which I have not been able to discover, this section is missing in my Hebrew text, which skips from 4:30 to 5:1. I have no way to examine the original meaning of certain words used. It is obvious that, however great Solomon's insight and understanding may have been, it was not measureless as the sand on the seashore. However eloquent the expression may be, it cannot be taken literally. Solomon was not omniscient. His wisdom was more than that of being very bright. It was what God had given him in answer to his prayers. and it cannot have been learned from available study material. We know very little about 5 names of philosophers of that time which are given in the text. Some of them may have been authors of certain psalms, such as Ethan and Heman. Of the 3,000 proverbs he wrote, about 1/3 is preserved in the book. Of Proverbs. Of the Psalms, only Psalm 72, 127, and 128 have been ascribed to Solomon, and even that has been doubted by some scholars. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, comments, while this account reflects Solomon's education as a wise man comparable with those of other contemporary states of his day in literary and scientific attainment, it was no mere rhetoric. The creation of zoological and botanical gardens in the capital city was an achievement boasted by many kings. Their purpose was not only for pleasure, but also for practical purposes and the provision of support for palace and temple. Adad Shumayuzer, circa 1200 BC, did this at Babylon, where later Nebuchadnezzar was to construct his famous Hanging Gardens c. 600 BC. Other examples of walled royal gardens were already attested at Nineveh, where those made by Tiglath-Pileser I, circa 1100 BC, were kept by Ashurbanipal, 600 BC, while at Kalash, Nimrud, Ashur-nasir-apli, 860 BCs, laid out a garden with at least 85 named species. Thus Solomon could well have created parks and gardens as Ekel 2:5. Their beauty and fragrances are reflected in the Song of Songs, e.g. 1:4, 2:3, 6:2, etc. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. According to Jewish tradition, Josephus, Solomon also had gardens 9 kilometers south of Jerusalem, outside Bethlehem at Eton. 2 Chronicles 11 verse 6, Etam, as Eliksek Psalm 74 verse 15, modern Etham. Khirbet Elho, which abounded with parks and streams. In the time of Zedekiah, the king's garden was watered by sluices from Siloam, 2 kgs, 25:4, nay, 315. The cedar of Lebanon was the tallest tree with the greatest spread, cf 5:6, ps. 80:10, and the Syrian hyssop, Ezob, was the smallest, stunted from its usual height, 50, 70 centimeters, by growing in a wall. NB translates marjoram. B. Solomon's building activities, 5:1, 9:9. I. Organization of materials and workforce, 5:1-18, Hebrews 5 verses 15 to 32. A. The alliance with Hiram of Tyre, 5:1-12. When Hiram king of Tyre heard that Solomon had been anointed king to succeed his father David, he sent his envoys to Solomon, because he had always been on friendly terms with David. 2 Solomon sent back this message to Hiram. 3. You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster. 5. I intend, therefore, to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David, when he said, your son whom I will put on the throne in your place will build the temple for my name. 6. So give orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My men will work with yours, and I will pay you for your men whatever wages you set. You know that we have no one so skilled in felling timber as the Sidonians. 7. When Hiram heard Solomon's message, he was greatly pleased and said, praise be to the Lord today, for he has given David a wise son to rule over this great nation. 8. So Hiram sent word to Solomon, I have received the message you sent me and will do all you want in providing the cedar and pine logs. 9. My men will haul them down from Lebanon to the sea, and I will float them in rafts by sea to the place you specify. There I will separate them, and you can take them away. And you are to grant my wish by providing food for my royal household. 10. In this way Hiram kept Solomon supplied with all the cedar and pine logs he wanted. 11. And Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, in addition to 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil. Solomon continued to do this for Hiram year after year. 12 The Lord gave Solomon wisdom, just as he had promised him. There were peaceful relations between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. When David had constructed a palace in Jerusalem, he conceived the idea of building a temple in which the Ark of the Covenant could be placed. We read that he. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Called the prophet Nathan and said, "Here I am, living in a palace of cedar, while the Ark of God remains in a tent." 40 Nathan approved the idea, but received a message from God that God did not approve of David's plan. The core of Nathan's message to David was that not David would build a house for God, but God would build a house for David. The Hebrew word used is bayit, which has the double meaning of a house as a dwelling place, as house in the sense of family. The British royal family, for instance, is called the House of Windsor. The message God had given to David by mouth of the prophet Nathan read literally, "When your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men, with floggings inflicted by men. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." 41 Solomon interpreted this to mean that he had to build the temple that his father David had had in mind. There is nothing to indicate that he was wrong in this conclusion. He could not have known that the message had two facets, a material one and a spiritual one. It referred to Solomon and to Jesus Christ. Solomon was the son who would be punished with the rod of men, with floggings inflicted by men, when he sinned. The house of David would eventually be established in the birth of his greatest son, Jesus, the Messiah. Jesus is God's actual temple. This is clear from the story of the cleansing of the temple in John's Gospel. Speaking about his own body, Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." 42 The Jews understood that Jesus was speaking about the edifice in Jerusalem, but John comments, "But the temple he had spoken of was his body." 43 Hiram initiated the contact with Solomon, congratulating him on his ascension to the throne. Solomon responded to this by requesting help in providing material for the building of the temple. Most Bible scholars believe that this Hiram was the same king who had built David's palace. 44, but that would make him a very old man at this time. Part of Hiram's friendly approach to Solomon may have been motivated by the fact that he saw a possibility of profiting financially from this relationship. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, observes, Hiram ruled Tyre c. 969 to 936 BC, and possibly as co-regent with his father Obibal from c. 980 BC. He was on friendly terms with David, translates Heb, Aheb, love, as used of a close covenant relationship, e.g. Deuteronomy 6 verse 5, Matt 22:37. A trade treaty gave Tyre access to inland trade across Israel to Judah, the Red Sea and Transjordan. The Tyre must have had a thriving lumber business. They not only grew the trees on the mountain slopes of their country, but they were also expert timbermen, and they knew something about seafaring. We read in the next section that Solomon sent a large 42 Samuel 7 verse 241, 2 Samuel 7 verses 12 to 1642, John 2 verse 1943, John 2 verse 2144, 2 Samuel 5 verse 11. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Team of Israelite laborers to Tyre for 1 month at the time to assist the Tyre lumberjacks in cutting and preparing the logs. The cedar and pine logs were tied together into rafts that were floated on the water of the Mediterranean from Tyre to Israel, where would be separated on the shore of Joppa. At that point, Solomon's men would take over and transport the logs to Jerusalem. We suppose that they were cut into usable boards and beams somewhere outside the city. For payment, Hiram would receive yearly supplies of food, wheat, and olive oil for his own court. Fee, an added note on the use of Israel's labor force, 5:13-18. 13 King Solomon conscripted laborers from all Israel, 30,000 men. 14, he sent them off to Lebanon in shifts of 10,000 a month, so that they spent 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. 15 Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hills. 16 as well as 3,300 foremen who supervised the project and directed the workmen. 17 at the king's command, they removed from the quarry large blocks of quality stone to provide a foundation of dressed stone for the temple. 18 the craftsmen of Solomon and Hiram and the men of Jebel cut and prepared the timber and stone for the building of the temple. For the task of getting the logs from Tyre to Jerusalem, Solomon conscripted Israelite men in the same way as men would have been called up for army service in times of war. Solomon's workforce for the construction of the temple consisted of 30,000 plus 70,000 plus 80,000 plus 3,300 equals 183,300 people. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, writes, forced slave labor, Mas Obed, totaling 150,000 was mainly drawn from the non-Israelite, Canaanite population, since a Hebrew was forbidden to enslave his fellow. 1 Kings 9 verse 11, Lev 25:39. But Barnes notes comments on Solomon's organization of this workforce. This was, apparently, the first time that the Israelites had been called upon to perform forced labor, though it had been prophesied. 1 Sam 8:16. David had bound to forced service the strangers, 1 Chron 22:2, but hitherto the Israelites had escaped. Solomon now, in connection with his proposed work of building the temple, with the honor of God as an excuse, laid this burden upon them. Out of the 1,300,000 able-bodied Israelites, 2 Sam 24:9, a band of 30,001 in 44 was raised, of whom 1/3 was constantly at work in Lebanon, while 2/3 remained at home and pursued their usual occupations. This, though a very light form of task work, was felt as a great oppression and was the chief cause of the revolt of the 10 tribes at Solomon's death, 1 Kings 12 verse 4. We may assume that, even if the day laborers were forced to work, the supervisors were volunteers who were paid for their job. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. The Wycliffe Bible Commentary observes, it appears that all the able-bodied males, except the members of the royal court, were engaged in some employment concerned with the construction of the temple. The stones were used primarily for the foundation of the temple, but there was also a stone wall, a section of which is still in existence. The first few rows of stone blocks that make out the present Wailing Wall are the only remaining parts of what used to be Solomon's temple. 2. Building the temple, 6:1-38. A. The date of foundation, 6:1. In the 480th year after the Israelites had come out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of the Lord. In introducing this section, Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, writes, the exterior, verses 2-14, interior, verses 15-30, entrance, verses 31-34, and courtyard, v.36, are described in sufficient detail for any sure reconstruction to be made. Some aspects, site, orientation, foundations, are omitted, and there are differences between this and the later free accounts of 2 Chronicles 3-4 and Ezekiel 41-42, which could be explained by subsequent changes. The LXX variants may not all be equally significant, and some comments are added by the historian, verses 11-13. The details of materials, measurements, and decoration might presume an archival report, or they might be drawn from the memory of an observer or from oral instructions given to craftsmen. The temple was sited on the threshing floor of Araunah bought by David, 2 Sam. 2400 hours 24, rather than above a Jebusite original sanctuary. The area is now marked by the Dome of the Rock, Haram Ashtoreth, in Jerusalem. The plan basically follows that of the tabernacle, but at double the size. Exodus 26 verses 15 to 25, 36:34, and consists of I. Entrance hall, vestibule of portico, ulam, 2. Sanctuary, holy place, main hall, nave, beagle, and 3. Inner shrine, holy of holies equals most holy place, Debir. The date indicated at which the construction of the temple began has been subject of much controversy among Bible scholars. The LXX has 440 years. The Wycliffe Bible Commentary observes, in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign. This introduction, as scholars agree, presents one of the most acute problems in OT chronology. The work proper upon the temple is said to have begun 480 years after the Exodus. This brings up the thorny problem of the date of the Exodus. There are two main systems of dating this event, one assigning it an early date and the other giving it a later date. To employ round figures for the sake of convenience, the first system dates the departure from Egypt about 1440 BC, while the second system dates it about 1250 BC. 1225 BC, or nearly 2 centuries later. The earlier date is in substantial agreement with Gen 1513, X 12:40-41, and Judges 11 verse 26, where Jephthah indicates that Israel had been in Canaan 300 years. Solomon ascended the throne about 963 BC. The 4th year of his reign, in which he began to build the temple, was probably about 959 BC. This verse must be 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Understood to favor the earlier dating of the Exodus. The city of Ramses, X111, which the children of Israel are said to have built for Pharaoh, would then be considered a later name for the older city of Zoan or Avris. The entrance of the patriarchs into Egypt would have been about 1870 BC, a date which allows for the 400 years in Egypt. The pharaoh of the Exodus may then be identified with Amenhotep II, who commenced his reign about 1447 BC. There is evidence that his eldest brother died and did not succeed his father. It seems that, in the light of present knowledge, the early date is to be preferred. The more important truth revealed in this verse is that the building of the temple is the fulfillment of God's promise, and one of the main reasons God had chosen Israel and Canaan to reveal himself in this world. In a way, the dating corresponds to Paul's statement about the incarnation. But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his son. 45. B. The structure, 6:2-10. 2. The temple that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 wide, and 30 high. 3. The portico at the front of the main hall of the temple extended the width of the temple, that is 20 cubits, and projected 10 cubits from the front of the temple. For he made narrow clerestory windows in the temple. 5. Against the walls of the main hall and inner sanctuary, he built a structure around the building, in which there were side rooms. 6. The lowest floor was 5 cubits wide, the middle floor 6 cubits, and the third floor 7. He made offset ledges around the outside of the temple so that nothing would be inserted into the temple walls. 7. In building the temple, only blocks dressed at the quarry were used, and no hammer, chisel, or any other iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built. 8. The entrance to the lowest floor was on the south side of the temple. A stairway led up to the middle level and from there to the third. 9. So he built the temple and completed it, roofing it with beams and cedar planks. 10. And he built the side rooms all along the temple. The height of each was 5 cubits, and they were attached to the temple by beams of cedar. It may be helpful to put the measurements given in the text in modern dimensions to give a clearer indication of the size of the building. The New Living Translation reads, "The temple that King Solomon built for the Lord was 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. The entry room at the front of the temple was 30 feet wide, running across the entire width of the temple. It projected outward 15 feet from the front of the temple. Solomon also made narrow recessed windows throughout the temple." Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, describes the measurements as follows. The temple is called the House Bet Byt throughout the narrative, or Temple of the Lord, Yahweh, 6:1, as in a later ostracon from Arad, Byt, El Yahweh. The interior measurement is 30 meters long by 10 meters wide by 15 meters high, according to the large or royal cubit, c. 50 centimeters. The portico entrance was open and equaled the width. 45 gallons 4:4, NKJV. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Of the temple and projected, Rohab, 10 cubits, RSV, 10 cubits deep, in front of the main hall, Hekel. The latter is a loan word, Babylonian ekalu, used of any very large structure, palace of temple, or part of it such as a wing, CFV, 17. The three technical terms usually translated windows have yet to be understood, MT halon sekufimitumim. This could describe the form or narrow clerestory windows placed high up to both side walls, CFRSV, like in Brazier's NB, REB, in a medieval castle, wider on the inside, narrowing to a slit on the outside. But such openings are not taken as a typical Syrian-Assyrian architectural feature of the elaborate portico in front of a main building, Bit Balani, with side rooms, columns, cf. Assur. Timu, threshold with lintel and doorposts, Assur. Askupatu, windows and a balcony. The side rooms were a structure, i.e. on a platform. They were probably curved. Inside, like flying buttresses, heb slow t, ribs, akad. Silu, arch, hence envy. Arcades to give access. This may explain how they were ranged against the wall with floor space between the outer wall and the rib, increasing at each upper level. The joints rested on offset ledges or rebatements, REB, verses 9 to 10, Negro T, diminishings all around the outside wall of the main temple, thus avoiding making holes in the sanctuary wall, V, 7. The total floor space of this storage area, 3,060 cubits, used for treasury, offerings paid and king, was twice that of the worship area within the temple itself. Although the construction of this huge building cannot have been carried out without making any noise at all, the normal loud sounds of constructing would not be heard. The stones were all prepared and cut at the right sizes at the quarry from which they were taken. Although some spiritual implications may be drawn from this procedure, we must be careful not to over-spiritualize. The Adam Clarke's commentary comments, but why? Is this so particularly marked? Is it not because the temple was a type of the kingdom of God, and the souls of men are to be prepared here for that place of blessedness? There is no preaching, exhortations, repentance, fears, cries, nor prayers. The stones must be all squared and fitted here for their place in the New Jerusalem, and, being living stones, must be built up a holy temple for a habitation of God through the Spirit. The Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary adds, the discovery of the great quarry under Bezitha has shown that these immense stones were excavated, hewn, and fully prepared on the spot, whence they were conveyed on trucks or on rollers down the gently inclined plane to the site chosen for the temple. The same commentary quotes a short couplet, "No workman's steel, no ponderous axes rang. Like some tall, calm the noiseless fabric sprang." C. A reminder of God's promise, 6:11-13. 11. The word of the Lord came to Solomon. 12. As for this temple you are building, if you follow my decrees, carry out my regulations, and keep all my commands and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise I gave to David your father. 13. And I will live among the Israelites, and will not abandon my people Israel. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Although God had told David, "I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I have been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling." 46, he said to Solomon that he would make his presence known in the temple Solomon intended to build. But this would be conditional upon Solomon's obedience. God's promises are rarely self-fulfilling. They are qualified by human faith and obedience. It was the presence of the Lord that made Israel God's chosen nation. The pulpit commentary observes, a fresh element is here introduced into the promise, arising out of the erection of the temple. God had pledged his presence to the tabernacle. Exodus 25 verse 8, 29 verse 45, cf. Leviticus 26 verse 11. And the temple was reared to be his dwelling place. 1 Kings 8 verse 13. 2 Chronicles 6 verse 2. He now assures the royal builder that he will occupy it. Jehovah Shammah, Ezekiel 48 verse 35. The covenant relation shall be more firmly established. As the Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary observes, this message too. Solomon was meant to warn him against the pride and presumption of supposing that, after the erection of so magnificent a temple, he and his people would always be sure of the presence and favor of God. The condition on which that blessing could alone be expected was expressly stated. The dwelling of God among the children of Israel refers to those symbols of his presence in the temple, which were the visible tokens of his spiritual relation to that people. God's presence in the temple would make Jerusalem the spiritual capital of the world. D. The interior woodwork, 6:14-18. 14. So Solomon built the temple and completed it. 15. He lined its interior walls with cedar boards, paneling them from the floor of the temple to the ceiling, and covered the floor of the temple with planks of pine. 16. He partitioned off 20 cubits at the rear of the temple with cedar boards from floor to ceiling to form within the temple an inner sanctuary, the most holy place. 17. The main hall in front of this room was 40 cubits long. 18. The inside of the temple was cedar, carved with gourds and open flowers. Everything was cedar. No stone was to be seen. The pulpit commentary states, the practice of covering stone walls with a lining of wood, which in turn was ornamented with gold or color. Jeremiah 22 verse 14 seems to have had its origin in Phoenicia and may have been suggested to Solomon by his Sidonian workmen. Cf. 2 Chronicles 2 verse 14. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, writes, the technical terms are not yet fully understood, and the repetitive and explanatory phrases could well be the historian's comment when the temple has been destroyed. The planks of pine, v. 15, and res v. cedar, c. 5:6, may have formed an arched, sal, ot, or vaulted roof. Ceiling follows LXX reading chorate, wall. The inner sanctuary, shrine, RB, is defined here as the most holy place, innermost part, RB, partitioned, NB, or screened off from the main hall, Hekel. The word for the inner shrine, Debir, is used only in the description of the temple. 46, 2 Samuel 7 verse 6. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Building and may relate to the back part, Heb H. Daber, turn the back, Akkad. Dabaru, rather to oracle, Heb. I daber, to speak as AV, RSV. E. The inner sanctuary, 6:19-28. 19. He prepared the inner sanctuary within the temple to set the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord there. 20. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 wide, and 20 high. He overlaid the inside with pure gold, and he also overlaid the altar of cedar. 21. Solomon covered the inside of the temple with pure gold, and he extended gold chains across the front of the inner sanctuary, which was overlaid with gold. 22. So he overlaid the whole interior with gold. He also overlaid with gold the altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary. 23. In the inner sanctuary, he made a pair of cherubim of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. 24. One wing of the first cherub was 5 cubits long, and the other wing 5 cubits, 10 cubits from wingtip to wingtip. 25 The second cherub also measured 10 cubits, for the two cherubim were identical in size and shape. 26 The height of each cherub was 10 cubits. 27 He placed the cherubim inside the innermost room of the temple with their wings spread out. The wing of one cherub touched one wall, while the wing of the other touched the other wall, and their wings touched each other in the middle of the room. 28 He overlaid the cherubim with gold. The Hebrew word used in these verses to describe the Holy of Holies is Dabir, which the KJV renders with oracle. Evidently, the word has changed meaning over the years. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it, an authoritative or wise utterance, or a person of great authority or wisdom. In the context of this text, it obviously stands for a place, not a word. When Moses built the tabernacle, God had shown him the model. We read in Exodus that God told him, "Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you." 47 The author of Hebrews refers to this, saying, "Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain." 48 God had shown David a similar blueprint of the temple to be built. In 1 Chronicles, we read that David passed on these instructions to Solomon. Then David gave his son Solomon the plans for the portico of the temple, its buildings, its storerooms, its upper parts, its inner rooms, and the place of atonement. He gave him the plans of all that the Spirit had put in his mind for the courts of the temple of the Lord and all the surrounding rooms, for the treasuries of the temple of God, and for the treasuries for the dedicated things. All this, David said, I have in writing from the hand of the Lord upon me, and he gave me understanding in all the details of the plan. 49 47 Exodus 25 verse 9 48 Hebrews 8 verse 549 Ikron 28:11 12:19 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. F. The carvings and the doors. 6:29-38. 29 On the walls all around the temple, in both the inner and outer rooms, he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. 30 He also covered the floors of both the inner and outer rooms of the temple with gold. 31 For the entrance of the inner sanctuary, he made doors of olive wood with 5-sided jambs. 32 And on the 2 olive wood doors he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid the cherubim and palm trees with beaten gold. 33 In the same way, he made 4-sided jambs of olive wood for the entrance to the main hall. 34 He also made 2 pine doors, each having 2 leaves that turned in sockets. 35 He carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers on them, and overlaid them with gold hammered evenly over the carvings. 36 And he built the inner courtyard of 3 courses of dressed stone and 1 course of trimmed cedar beams. 37 The foundation of the temple of the Lord was laid in the 4th year, in the month of Ziv. 38 In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, the 8th month, the temple was finished, in all its details according to its specifications. He had spent 7 years building it. It seems that in designing the detailed ornamentation of the walls and doors of the temple, Solomon used creativity and went beyond anything David had imagined. Some Bible scholars believe that the cherubim, palm trees, and flowers may have been reminders of the paradise. This would then suggest that man's fellowship with God, that had been broken when Adam and Eve fell into sin, was being restored in the temple service. The pulpit commentary observes, while we are ignorant of the precise form and of the arrangement of these ornamental carvings, we are not wholly in the dark as to their symbolism. For everything in the temple, we may be sure, had a meaning. Let us inquire, then, into the significance of the cherubim, the palms, and the flowers. 1. The cherubim have been regarded by some as symbols of the invisible Godhead, by others as representations of the heavenly spirits which surround the Lord of glory and set forth psychical life at its highest stage, but it seems best to view them as symbols of all animal life, including the highest and perhaps not excluding the thought of him who is the source and spring of life, The living creatures, 50, CFCH 1228. Hence they are spoken of as chayote. Ezekiel 1 verses 5 and 13, 15, etc. The living things compare tazoa. Revelation 4 verses 6 and 8, 9, and even as Hakaya, the life. Ezekiel 10 verses 14 and 15, etc. The cherubim consequently speak of the great animal kingdom before its creator. Creaturely being reaches its highest degree in those which have an anima, and among these, the lion, the bull, the eagle, and the man are the highest and most complete. These shapes, accordingly, were not inappropriate or unmeaning in a temple raised by the creature to the glory of the creator. 50. The pulpit commentary uses Latin here, which I translated. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 2. Just as the cherubim speak of animal, so do the palms of vegetable life. They are the princes of the vegetable kingdom, one Bible scholar states. Amongst trees there is none so lofty and towering, none which has such a fair majestic growth, which is so evergreen, and which affords so grateful a shade, and such noble fruits which are said to be the food of the blessed in paradise as the palm, who also adds that it is said to have as many excellent properties as there are days in the year, and cites another Bible scholar as designating it the noblest of plants forms to which the nations have always accorded the meed of beauty. Judea, he further remarks, is the fatherland of the palm, so much so that the palm in later days became the symbol of Palestine, as on the well-known coin with the legend Judea Capta. The palms, therefore, tell of the vegetable world, and of him who fashioned its noble and graceful forms. 3. And very similar was the testimony of the flowers. Flowers and bloom have been, from ancient times to our own, the usual symbols of life's fullness. So then by the flower work, as well as by the cherubim and the palm trees, was the dwelling of Jehovah, which was adorned therewith, designated as an abode of life. On the earthly dwelling place of the eternal, that is to say, were everywhere portrayed the various tokens of his almighty power and goodness. And the significance of each is the same. Thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. They were graved within and without. These words, here and in ver. 30, are generally taken to mean in the oracle and in the house. But it is worthy of consideration whether they do not rather signify in the house and in the porch. The latter was overlaid with gold. 2 Chronicles 3:4. It is doubtful whether W-laciate on the outside can be applied to any part of the interior, and here its application would be to the oracle. The work of building the temple and finishing it in all of its details took 7 years, which was about half the time Solomon needed for the building of his own palace. The Wycliffe Bible Commentary comments, these verses give the dates of the commencement of the house and of its completion, a period spanning 7 years, from the 4th to the 11th year of Solomon's reign. This was a comparatively short time for a building of such magnificent structure. It should be remembered that 1. Much of the preparation had been completed even before Solomon's time. 2. The building, though highly ornate, was comparatively small. 3. A huge personnel was employed in the task. The present writer sees no censure implied in the statement that it took Solomon 13 years to build his own house, but simply a matter of fact. 3. Building his palace, 7:1-12. 1. It took Solomon 13 years, however, to complete the construction of his palace. 2. He built the palace of the forest of Lebanon 100 cubits long, 50 wide and 30 high, with 4 rows of cedar columns supporting trimmed cedar beams. 3. It was roofed with cedar above the beams that rested on the columns, 45 beams, 15 to a row. For its windows were placed high in sets of 3, facing each other. 5. All the doorways had rectangular frames. They were in the front part in sets of 3, facing each other. 6. He made a colonnade 50 cubits long and 30 wide. In front of it was a portico, and in front of that were pillars and an overhanging roof. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. 7. He built the throne hall, the hall of justice, where he was to judge, and he covered it with cedar from floor to ceiling. 8. And the palace in which he was to live, set farther back, was similar in design. Solomon also made a palace like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had married. 9. All these structures, from the outside to the great courtyard and from foundation to eaves, were made of blocks of high-grade stone cut to size and trimmed with a saw on their inner and outer faces. 10. The foundations were laid with large stones of good quality, some measuring 10 cubits and some 8. 11. Above were high-grade stones cut to size and cedar beams. 12. The great courtyard was surrounded by a wall of 3 courses of dressed stone and 1 course of trimmed cedar beams, as was the inner courtyard of the temple of the Lord with its portico. Although the building of Solomon's palace took almost twice the time it took for the building of the temple, Solomon at least observed the right priorities. The prophet could not reproach the king that he neglected the Lord in order to attend to his own business first. God's reprimand to the people who had returned from Babylonian captivity was not heard here. We read what the prophet Haggai reproached the people of his time. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, "The time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built." Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses, while this house remains a ruin? 51. This section forms an interruption of the account of the building of the temple. The pulpit commentary observes the much longer period occupied in the erection of the royal palace is easily accounted for. In the first place, the buildings were much larger, and the undertaking altogether was a much more extensive one. Ver. 2. Then, those 7 years only were consumed in the actual building of the temple, yet preparations for the work had been made, both by David and Solomon, for a long time beforehand. Lastly, a special force of laborers would appear to have been employed on the temple, while it is probable that they wrought at the palaces in greatly diminished numbers. So that the longer period spent over his own house does not argue selfishness or worldliness on Solomon's part. On the contrary, it speaks well for his piety that he built the temple first and urged on that sacred work with so much vigor. The 13 years date from the completion of the 7 years of 1 Kings 6 verse 38. That is to say, the building of the temple and palace together occupied 20 years, as is expressly stated in 1 Kings 9:10. Donald J. Wiseman in 1 and 2 Kings comments on the building of Solomon's own palace. Since the temple is the main focus of the historian's account, less spaces devoted to the complex of royal secular buildings for administrative and judicial purposes. All these were within a large courtyard to which general reference is made. Verses 9 to 12. This section is not in 2 Chronicles and is placed elsewhere by Alexx and Josephus. Yet the work on these buildings took almost twice as long as the smaller temple. 51 Hag 1:2-4. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. Construction, perhaps undertaken concurrently, in 7 years, verses 6 to 38, giving a total of 20 years. The pillared hall, called the Palace of the Forest of Lebanon, was used as an audience chamber or throne hall, and at 46 meters by 23 meters by 13.5 meters was larger than the temple. It also served as a state treasury, displaying selected precious objects received as tribute, cf 10:16-17. It was most essentially an armory which, in the ancient Near East, occupied separate guarded quarters. The building was named after the 4 rows of cedar columns which made it appear forest-like. 2 rows may have been against the walls, cf Alexx reads 3 rows, and 2 down the center, allowing for the broad doorways. The roof rested upon 45 pillars, 15 in each row, RSV, and could have served as the support for the floor of an upper room. This is more likely than that the trimmed beams, keratot son, things were an architectural feature, e.g. in capitals. 4. The temple furnishings, 7:13-51. A. Hiram of Tyre, 7:13-14. 13 King Solomon sent to Tyre and brought Hiram. 14, whose mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and whose father was a man of Tyre and a craftsman in bronze. Hiram was highly skilled and experienced in all kinds of bronze work. He came to King Solomon and did all the work assigned to him. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, comments, "It is made clear that non-Israelite skills were used in the decoration of God's house. This was considered as another expression of practically inspired wisdom shown in understanding and knowledge comparable with that used in the construction of the tabernacle, tent, shrine." Cf. Exodus 31 verses 3-5. Architects are sometimes named in ancient building texts. Hiram, cf. verses 40-41. 2 Chronicles 2 verse 13 may have been given with reference to his mother and connection with Israel to bring this into a nationalistic picture. The link with the Naphtali/Dan border, as 2 Chr 2:14, should have been through his mother's first marriage. The Hebrew text of v.13 reads literally, "He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man, a worker in Tyre." The Hebrew word translated worker is chorish, which is usually used to indicate a Levite. The only other place in Scripture where this word is used is in Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. 52 most Bible scholars believe he was a half-bred Israelite. Since Hiram's expertise was in bronze, he may have only been involved in the fabrication of the bronze or brass articles used in the temple, not in the whole construction of the building. 52 Genesis 4 verse 22. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. B. The Jachin and Boaz Pillars, 7:15-22. 15. He cast 2 bronze pillars, each 18 cubits high and 12 cubits around, by line. 16. He also made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. Each capital was 5 cubits high. 17. A network of interwoven chains festooned the capitals on top of the pillars, 7 for each capital. 18. He made pomegranates in 2 rows encircling each network to decorate the capitals on top of the pillars. He did the same for each capital. 19. The capitals on top of the pillars in the portico were in the shape of lilies, 4 cubits high. 20. On the capitals of both pillars, above the bowl-shaped part next to the network, were the 200 pomegranates in rows all around. 21. He erected the pillars at the portico of the temple. The pillar to the south he named Jachin, and the one to the north Boaz. 22. The capitals on top were in the shape of lilies. And so the work on the pillars was completed. The pulpit commentary observes, brass is a compound of copper and zinc, but nekasheth originally and strictly signifies a pure metal. Deuteronomy 8 verse 9, 33:25, etc. Job 28 verse 2. There were copper mines in Palestine, and the art of working this metal was known at a very remote period. Genesis 4 verse 22. In later times, the word sometimes denoted brass chacos, or copper bronze, a mixture of copper and tin. Cf. Jeremiah 6 verse 28. From 2 Chronicles 2 verse 14, we learn that Hiram was skillful to work in gold and in silver and brass, in iron, in stone, and in timber, etc. From the mention of brass only in this passage and in ver. 45, it has been somewhat hastily concluded that the work that he personally did for Solomon was limited to works in brass. It is, perhaps, safer to say that brass only is mentioned here because the following section treats exclusively of the brazen ornaments, etc. of the sanctuary. It would almost seem, however, as if he was not employed to make the vessels of gold. Nor does this supposition really contradict the statement made below, viz., that he wrought all Solomon's work. Donald J. Wiseman, in 1 and 2 Kings, comments, the 2 bronze pillars, cf. verses 41-42, may have been hollow. RSV gives a width of 4 fingers equals 7.5 centimeters. The measurements, 8.1 m high and 5.4 m circumference, 1.9 m diameter, agree with Jeremiah 52:2 and may include the original capitals, verses 16 to 20, cf. verses 41 to 42. The interwoven chains were of filigree work, JB, nets of checker work, NRSV, or, and of ornamental network, REV, and were draped 7 to each capital, MT, Sib, A, reeds, nets, Seb, Akim, by RSV. Some MSS read pomegranates, rimonim, other pillars, amudim, set in strings of 100, Jeremiah 52 verse 25, above the globular or bowl-shaped projection, RSV, Heb 10, belly. An ivory pomegranate with the inscription, belonging to the house of YHWY, perhaps the head of a staff used in the temple at this time, has survived. The top of the pillar had the working of a lily, Heb Susan of Egypt, SSN, lotus. Flower, possibly taken as a symbol of life. 1 Kings. Copyright 2014 John Schultz. All rights reserved. www.bible-commentaries.com. The location of the pillars is debated. They could have been freestanding, as in a number of Phoenician and other examples. They may have supported the projecting roof. The pillars to the right, south, and left were respectively named Jachin and Boaz, v.21, but their purpose and significance is yet unknown. They seem too tall to be refillable cressets or light standards symbolic of the pillar of fire and cloud demonstrating God's presence. Other suggestions include one that here we have comments by the craftsman that it is firm, or yakin, solid, and it is strong lit, with strength, bias. This seems unlikely, as are parallels within mythology and standing stones, fertility symbols. Some take the names as the first word of statements that he, God, will establish the throne of David and his kingdom forever, and in the strength of the Lord shall the king rejoice, denoting the position of Davidic dynasty. C. The Bronze Sea, 7:23-26. 23. He made the sea of cast metal, circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim and 5 cubits high. It took a line of 30 cubits to measure around it. 24 below the rim. Gourds encircled it, 10 to a cubit. The gourds were cast in 2 rows in one piece with the sea. 25. The sea stood on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea rested on top of them, and their hindquarters were toward the center. 26. It